What's going on, everybody? This came here, Easy Work Acres. It has been a little while since our last video, but we have stayed busy out here, and I wanted to do a follow-up on our sunflower field that we planted a little while back. So if you remember this sunflower field, and what we planned on doing with this was basically just plant some sunflowers, but last minute, like very last minute, we decided we wanted to do this and throw in sunflowers near our garden, which our whole garden is right here. It's done really well this season. We'll have a video covering that as well. But basically, we got all kinds of these beautiful sunflowers out here, and it ended up working out. So if you remember, if you watched our previous video, we actually box bladed this area to do sunflowers, and all we did was there was no preparation to this other than mowing the grass low and then taking the tines of our box blade over it just to break ground so we could get seeds in pretty easily. So for one, you can see there's quite a lot of sunflowers up here in this beginning row. Now, when we did the initial planting, we only had enough seeds to go about 20 foot back into this field a little bit. And then we ended up having to plant a second day about a week later or so. And if you look back there, now there are sunflowers back here across the back, like you can look in there. You know, there's a couple, but the weeds just got too tall before those actually germinated well and were able to get high enough that they were getting adequate sunlight and combating for water. So right after we got these back ones, this back 3/4 of the field planted, there ended up not being rain for like 3 whole weeks. So we were like almost on a full month drought before we got rain. And then it just basically got taken over. The weeds were already well established again by that point when we actually started getting some rain for things to germinate. And then we got some sunflowers to pop up, but they just didn't make it. So the back half didn't do so well. Front half did awesome. Now, the problem being is that the whole back 3/4 was the black oil sunflower seeds, which we planned on using to help with feed with our chickens, or just give like some extra treats to the chickens and stuff like that. And then we were going to harvest a bunch of those seeds to replant for next season. So it kind of sucked that those didn't grow, but it doesn't mean that we didn't get all kinds of benefits from these front ones that did grow. And this was like a mixed pack that has all kinds of different sunflowers in it, but a lot of them don't have really big seeds on them or anything like that. So not too great for feeding our chickens with, but they were great for a pollinator garden. So one thing that was super awesome about having all these sunflowers nearby wasn't just that it was pretty, but it made a really great pollinator garden along with all the wildflowers that were growing out here. So yes, this is weeds, but at one point, and I think it's just because it's the part of the season at this point, but there was tons of wildflowers in here with the sunflowers that just looked freaking awesome. So even though the back 3/4 didn't grow a lot with the sunflowers, there was all kinds of wildflowers throughout it, which is why I decided to continue to let it grow up, even though there wasn't sunflowers growing in there, because all the wildflowers in conjunction with the sunflowers created a pristine pollinator garden that made it really, really good for our garden, because we had a ton of bees, whole bunch of bees in our garden, which I think is why we saw such a good harvest on a lot of these vegetables, like our zucchini, our squash, specifically our cucumbers. Look, I got a good cucumber right there. Big old fat boy. I tell you what, like these are hard to spot. But basically all those flowers that are all over those, you know, they won't grow fruit if they don't get pollinated. And we had tons of bees on everything, which was super, super awesome for us. And then one more thing that I read online that I really wasn't completely sure if it was gonna work for us or not, is that it was a great way to keep pests off of our garden. So apparently sunflowers are super awesome for attracting pests that would normally eat your vegetables or your vegetable plants at least. So we had very, very little problems with aphids and other things like that. And I really believe it has a lot to do with us having a pollinator garden right next to our garden that attracted those pests to there instead of out here in our garden, and even in our in-bed garden instead of just even our raised bed. So some other benefits to the sunflowers besides just looking pretty and the potential of being able to feed our chickens off of it, but they were great for pollinators and great for pests as well. So I'm pretty happy with what happened, even if 3/4 of it didn't grow. This front quarter here was well worth putting the work in, that last minute till up and getting things planted in the ground. Now, when this field is totally done, like sunflowers are done, so they're died off, they're not looking pretty like they are right now, we will knock all this down and then let the chickens run over. And I'm sure there's some seeds and stuff in there that they can eat and they'll enjoy. But we also plan on just using this plot of land right here to expand our garden. So our garden did really well. You can see there's lots of weeds growing up in some of these raised beds and stuff. That's because those beds are pretty much done. We'll end up cleaning them out and getting them ready for next season. All of our tomatoes and peppers and stuff are still rocking right now, but all of our onions and stuff we've already pulled. So there's just weeds in those beds, but we want to continue expanding this garden all the way out into this field right here. So it did really well, and we're selling vegetables and stuff, which I wasn't expecting to do in our first season of gardening like this. This is our first year of successful gardening with getting a good amount of vegetables, and they're selling pretty well alongside of our eggs. So we want to double down on the garden for next year because there is a supply and demand issue, and we would like to not have that. We would like to have plenty of supply for the demand that people are wanting. So we're going to utilize this field right here to expand our in-ground garden for next season. But in all, this sunflower field, I'd say was pretty successful for very little preparation or anything like that ahead of time. It was a very last minute thing. So you can just like basically get a groove in the ground and plant some sunflowers and they will grow, given that they have the water that they need to germinate and get growing. Because this whole front quarter here, I mean, there's hundreds of sunflowers just in this front like 10, 15 feet here. And then the other, 3,000 seeds we planted just didn't do well when they didn't have water for 3 weeks after planting. So that's all I got for you. Just wanted to give you a follow-up on how the sunflower field did. And then our plans for the future with this sunflower field is basically turning into more garden beds. And we'll start a sunflower field somewhere else and with a different plan in mind, which when we get to that, we will do a video on how we plan on actually preparing for a sunflower field a whole season ahead of time so that we have a really, really beautiful one for next season. You all have a good one. Thanks for watching.